What is up, y'all? What is up? So, welcome to my live stream over here on YouTube. I just started going live on YouTube, so bear with me as I work to start bringing some information over to this platform. So, if you follow me, I normally go live over there on Facebook, but that's not what I have going on right now. So, hopefully, you will come in and join me. Remember to click subscribe and share out that we're over here going live. So I wanted to talk about this situation with interracial relationships. And it's always an interesting conversation for me to have because I'm a product of an interracial relationship. Well, I should say my mother is a product of an interracial relationship, therefore down the line. So, so am I, right? And so my grandfather is Japanese, my grandmother is Black, and so my mother is half and half, and then my father is Black. So, me, I call myself Black. All right. So, and I'm gonna talk about that in a minute because I think there's something to the idea of love. But let's start off a little bit with some history, right? Why is Becky bad for our bottom line? And I want to just kind of tell you, a little bit about where I'm going with this because we're going to talk about this conversation around ADOS and how that has played a role in some of the things that's going on. There's going to be a lot to it. So stick with me as we kind of jump into a little bit about this conversation. I think it's an important conversation for us to have. So let me set the tone a little bit. Let's talk historics, right? Let's talk history, I should say. And I always like to have some conversation around history because that in and of itself, when we don't really understand where we've come from, it's hard to put what's happening in present day into context. And I think that's so important. If we can't understand what's happening today or why what's happening today is happening, then it's really difficult for us to understand why some people may have issues with what's going on or why some people may feel like it's cool or whatever, right? So everybody comes from a different paradigm, but there's a place and a space in history in which this conversation is very relevant. And let me adjust my chair, not even to say like old history, but like, fairly recent history. So here's the thing, right? So when I say Becky, of course, I'm talking about these white women and the fact that these interracial relationships are becoming more and more prevalent. So some of the, highlighted relationships of Black women and white men. I can't remember which one of the Maori sisters is married to a white man. You have Serena Williams, you have Eve, right? So we've seen some prominent Black women who have married white men, but by and far, what the issue when we look at interracial relationships mainly falls on the fact that men, you got a lot of these men and these Beckys out here, right? I think Jesse Williams fell from grace. Like women were just boosting him up. He was just the shit. And then, he left his Black wife in the middle of talking about Black empowerment and all of this. He left his Black wife for Becky. Like, come on. So why is this such a big issue, right? And I want to talk everything else outside of love. That's why I'm going to touch on love just a minute, because I know that's something that people tend to throw in. Well, you could be really in love with somebody, and that's true. But there's a lot of other issues around the situation that I think we don't shed enough light on, where it sounds like it's just a hating that situation, right? Oh, you're just hating on their relationship, where people can love whoever they want to love, and love has no color, and all that other, stuff that we hear. And a lot of that's just BS. That's just not how it necessarily works. So I want to kind of speak a little bit to that point. So let's talk about this. First of all, can we at least acknowledge, let's start off by acknowledging that white women have caused the loss of life. They've caused the loss of wealth within our community, right? So can we at least start by acknowledging that? Everything from Emmett Till, Carolyn Bryant, who's the person who caused the death of Emmett Till, right? So let's talk about that story just briefly. Let's just discuss the fact that here you have this kid and this white woman lies on him, and her brothers and her father go out and they torture and beat and kill this teenage boy over this white woman, right? Can we talk about Black Wall Street? As we know, Black Wall Street got started. There was already a lot of tension that was going on in the air. Tension was in the air because Black people were thriving and Black people were doing well. But the spark that really just blew up like quite literally blew up Black Wall Street was the fact that supposedly this man assaulted this white woman in an elevator, right? And so you have like Rosewood, right? So of course we know the story of Rosewood where Becky calls rape, and really what it was that her, she was over here cheating on her husband, and the white guy done beat the shit out of her. So what happens is she goes and calls rape on a Black man, right? And so what happens? Rosewood goes up in smoke. And so we've seen this time and time again. And even if you want to get real into more today's history about it, okay, let's talk about Tamir Rice. How did Tamir Rice get killed? Because Becky was being nosy across the street and called the police, and they came and shot down Tamir Rice before he even knew what was happening. So there is a long history of Becky not being our friend. Becky is not our friend. She has not been friends to Black people. She has not been friends with Black women, and we should acknowledge a lot of that history that's there. If you want to know why our children were being used as alligator bait, if you want to know why we've had to beat the shit out of our own children, it was to stop Becky from beating our children. If we want to know how a lot of our babies was getting killed because when her husband came over and raped us and we produced that little light-skinned baby, Becky's mad and Becky beat the shit out of our kids, right? Like Becky is not friends with Black people. And what is sometimes often hurtful is the fact that Black people like have forgotten this, because Becky has been put on this pedestal, right? So she's supposed to be the epitome of beauty, and she's supposed to be the most desirable and all this other bullshit. And that in and of itself, that whole thought process has been harmful to the Black narrative, because she's this thing that we're striving to get to, right? And she shouldn't be. She's been very harmful for our community. So that's just to kind of understand some of the history, and none of that history is refutable. So, I try not to come from a place of like pure emotion, because your emotions will lead you down the wrong path. So whenever I want to come with a topic, like I want to come and talk from a space and a place of facts, and some introspection or whatever, and some perspective, but really a lot of times from place of facts and a place of context, so that we can really understand why this is the issue. So then let me talk about the love situation real quick. Like I want to dig into that, because I think it's an important part of the conversation to have around the fact that people are people and we do fall in love with each other. So as I started off the conversation, I definitely mentioned the fact that I'm a product of a biracial relationship. So I'm not, I am Japanese and Black. I'm a quarter Japanese. I'm 3/4 Black. I definitely see myself as being Black, and that's just that. But my mother is half Black and half Japanese, and my mother grew up in the 50s. So there's a lot to that whole conversation and that story about what she had to go through as a biracial child, in particular in that time when it wasn't really popular to be a biracial child, right? So just to, shine light and express that. But here's the thing. So when my grandfather met my grandmother had been divorced 3 times. My grandmother had 9 other children. And then my grandfather, who was Japanese, he had come over from Hawaii, come over to California. He meets this Black woman. So basically, he's meeting somebody who's at the bottom of the bottom of the bottom already, with 10 children or 9 children and 3 failed relationships, right? So do I believe that my grandfather loved my grandmother? I really do. There was something in that relationship that had to have clicked, because there was no benefit to him to have to marry her. There wasn't any benefit to that. And so my grandmother and my grandfather, they got married. They had my mom. I have an uncle who's questionable, but he claims that he is a product of that union as well. And so I'm gonna give that to him. But they created these children. My grandfather was loved so much by my grandmother's other children that I have an aunt that actually changed her last name to his last name, even though she knows and has a relationship with her father, right? So I don't want to take away from the idea or the fact that 2 people of a different race can fall in love. That is certainly a reality of life, right? But also, I think there's a history behind, from a mental perspective, there is a history behind what it looks like for 2 people from a different race to get together, right? So my grandmother had 3 Black husbands. She had no history of hating Blackness. My grandfather had a previous Japanese wife. He had no history of hating Japanese or his culture, right? So there's one thing that happens when we have an issue. There's one thing when we have an issue of not knowing who what am I trying to say? There's an issue when we like dissociate ourselves from our people, and then it's a whole nother situation to just happen to have fallen in love with somebody who looks different or comes from a different space from you, right? And so then you have people who have declared, I don't date Black women, I don't date Black men, right? And you hear the I don't date Black men way less. So I'm just going to be honest, like I'm kind of going in on the fellas a little bit today because this is a Becky issue. Like I really don't feel like this is a Brad issue. This is a Becky issue. Let's just call it what it is. Okay. So but with that, what I'm getting at with that point is the fact that there is a space and a place for love. There is. But you have people who are psychologically damaged to the point where they say things like, I don't date so-and-so in my race, right? And that is a whole different type of situation. And what we don't recognize oftentimes is that there's a power dynamic that is to that. So what happens, and even when I say I'm kind of going in on the fellas, like I'm gonna really just put it out there that I'm kind of going in on the fellas, because here's the part that I want you to think about. When a Black man marries a white woman or dates a white woman, and that white woman, you think she doesn't know off top that she has a power dynamic over that man? She could say all she wants to. I would never do that. But here's the reality. At the end of the day, anytime that Becky decides to call rape, who's going to be believed in that situation? Who's going to be believed in that situation? Our Black men are putting themselves in a vulnerable situation simply by dating Becky, because anytime Becky decides to call rape, that's that. Now, again, let's flip the script. So what happens if I decide I'm a date Brad and I call rape? Do I have the same type of protection that Becky has? Do I have the same type of protection that Becky has? What's up, Taz? Thank you. I appreciate the subscribe. Thank you. I'm growing this channel, so I appreciate the love. I want to know. I want to understand. Do I have the same type of protection as Becky? So even then, because I hear fellas is kind of under attack everywhere, and I'm not against our Black brothers at all. So I really, this is not an attack on our Black brothers. I'm just wanting to have the conversation around how and why these things are occurring, and for us to really begin to think about what that looks like for us. Okay, so just recognize that there's a different power dynamic. Black women are some of the least, or we are the least protected women, or the least protected people in the world. Like I would be willing to really, put that out there. Like we are the least protected people in the world, right? So I would say that if I said that my white husband raped me, I would be willing to say I have an uphill battle and I have a fight on my hands. If Becky said that her Black husband raped her, that's just believable, because people run to the rescue of Becky, right? All right, so I want us to understand what that looks like. And then let's also talk about that power dynamic, because I'm gonna bring up the Jice Smollett, however the hell you say his name. I'm gonna bring up the Jice situation, right? So people want to see Jice go to jail for maybe telling lies. And I talked about this over on my Facebook page about how the fact that this is not what we should be doing, that's not the focus of this. But here at the end of the day, Jice, if he did tell this lie, if he did stage this crime, right? If he staged this crime, why do Black folks feel like Jice should be going to jail? How many white folks have staged crimes? How many white folks have falsified police reports, right? So at the same time, not at the same time that this is happening, this actually happened earlier, but there's this white girl over in Texas. And I'm literally pulling out like one example, but I know that we can all think of a bunch of other examples. There's a white girl over in Texas. She claims that there are 3 Black men who raped her. Becky actually cut up her clothes. She shredded up her clothes, called the police, filed a whole police report. So she staged a crime and she filed a false police report. And when they found out that she filed a false police report, are charges being brought up on Becky? No, they're not. They're not going to. They really don't care. So at the end of the day, with this whole Jesse situation, Jesse hasn't hurt anybody. There's nothing that has happened to anybody on account of Jesse lying about him being attacked, right? But we're pushing for him to go to jail because he lied on a police report. But we have Becky and Brad and the police who lie on reports all the time. You have police who have video cam footage of accounts that are very blatantly different than what they have put in their police report. And nobody is promoting or pushing for them to go to jail. But we promote and push for us to go to jail. So we have to really recognize that although we can come and sit at the same lunch counter, although we can drink out the same water fountain, that we are not the same in this country. We are not the same in this country. So we really have to stop trying to persecute ourselves, give ourselves some grace. We should be focusing in on the Brads and the Beckys who are doing this. But again, as I said, Becky is just bad for our bottom line. Becky is bad for our bottom line. So we need to understand that there's a power dynamic that does not exist for the Black community that exists for Becky. It does not transfer over woman to woman. It doesn't matter how much of this womanist, feminist, whatever that we push, whatever happens, whatever rights that women get or gain as a part of this situation, Black women are still going to be at the bottom of that. Becky is still going to be at the top of that. So Becky is not good for us and for our bottom line. So then let's keep moving this conversation forward, right? So I just wanted to address the love portion before I start digging into all these other reasons as to why Becky is not good for our bottom line. There's other issues that I want to address, but I know people bring up the whole idea around love, right? So let's just knock the love situation out the way. When you start thinking about love, that is a situation that poor and middle class people think about. Now, Warren Buffett, he claims that his wife is the love of his life, and I believe that wholeheartedly, and good for him if that makes sense to him. But here's what he says consistently. If you talk to him about relationships, Warren Buffett says the most important decision that you can make is who you partner with. That comes out of one of the richest men in the world. Don't think for a second that people who are rich, who are thinking legacy, who are thinking multiple generations down the line, they're thinking intergenerationally. They are not just thinking about themselves, and they are not just thinking about today. They are thinking about how things are going to play out in the future, how their kids are going to do, how their grandchildren are going to do, how their great-grandchildren, like they are literally thinking multiple generations down the line. They are not just thinking about, do I love this person? They are literally planning out their marriage like a business transaction. Don't think for a minute that Mark Zuckerberg chose his wife out of pure love. That's just not how they're thinking. And I don't think that all of us have to think that way, but enough of us have to think in a strategic way about how we hold the Black family together and about how we hold the Black community together. And we're not thinking along those lines big enough because the gap is getting bigger. So I've heard this, like, people want to put out there, don't perpetuate the conversation that all Black men are marrying Becky. Well, I could tell you that they're not. Right now, today, the majority of Black men are still marrying Black women. So big ups to you. But the gap is widening. So whereas just not even a decade ago, when did Hill Harper's book come out? Hill Harper has that book, The Conversation. There's also another book that's a really good read called is Marriage for White People. Now that is a good read. It's actually, if you look at the book, Is Marriage for White People, the book looks thicker than what it is because it's like half of that book is research. So he has, 50 pages where he's citing all of the research and everything that he's done. So the book looks thicker than it is. It's not that long of a read, but it really starts digging into the aspects of how marital trends and stuff like that are going, right? So where it was like 80% or 85% of Black men are marrying Black women, that is getting closer to now 70% of Black men are dating Black women. So it's not quite there, but it's going to the point where more Black men are choosing to date and marry outside of their race. And out of all of the different races, so Asian, Hispanic, Arab, whatever, the majority of those men are dating white women or marrying white women. So Raider says Becky is bad, but what about Ken? Crickets. No, it's not crickets, because if you've been listening, I already said. So let me just back up just real quick, just to help Raider out real quick. Okay. I already stated that the number one issue is the fact that we're talking about different leverages and how things are going to go and how things are going to break down. So I am really talking more towards Black men at this moment. And I love my Black men, so I'm not beating up on Black men. What I'm saying is that we're talking about a Black man situation, because there's a difference in the power dynamics between Becky and between Brad. So I'm gonna just give you the one example that I use so that I can help you out. You just joined 2 minutes ago. Thank you for coming on in. I appreciate the support. So let me break this down. If Becky calls rape on her Black husband, Becky is going to be believed and her Black husband is going to be in some deep shit. If I go and marry Ken and I call rape on Ken, Ken is not going to be in the same type of shape that our Black men are going to be in. I'm going to have to have an uphill battle to prove that my white husband has harmed me. Becky don't have to prove that her Black husband has harmed her. So what I want to point out is that the power dynamics between Black men and Black men dating white women and Black women dating white men is a different conversation. Okay. So I just wanted to re-stress that since you came in and asked that question, but let's keep this rolling, y'all. So here's what I acknowledge the love situation, but what I think we have to really understand is that we have to not always just think about pure emotions. Like, emotions can really lead us down the wrong path in a lot of cases. And so if we're going to start thinking about intergenerational wealth, if we're going to be thinking about community, if we're going to be thinking about those other dynamics, we have to think about our relationships as a part of those dynamics and strengthen our relationships. And don't think for a moment that rich folks are not thinking this way. And so when I hear people talking about love, well, I just love that person. Well, as I pointed out with the example of my grandmother and my grandfather, I believe that is true, that you could really love somebody. There was no benefit for a Japanese man to come and marry a Black woman with 9 kids and 3 ex-husbands. There was no benefit there. So I believe he really loved her, but on the other side of that, when you start getting into, I don't date Black men and I don't date Black women, now we're talking about a psychological problem that you have when you even look yourself in the eye. Or in the mirror, right? So here's my thing. Is it love or is it an agenda? Is it love or is it an agenda? And I want to break down why I believe that this is an agenda. Let's start with the fact that everything in America is a motherfucking agenda. Can we start with that? Everything in America is an agenda. America is built on agendas. So let's just start there, okay? So is it love or is it an agenda? Everything in America is an agenda. Now, here's the thing. We're thinking individually when we talk about, oh, but I love her. I'm in love with her. So I don't care what none of y'all think. I'm in love with her. We're thinking as individuals. And the fact of the matter is, who is thinking strategically for the Black community? Understand that there are, as much as you'll run into the individual white person who only has to think individually for themselves, as a bigger picture, there are people who are thinking about and crafting and placing white people in positions of power and moving white people forward inside of the bigger, broader picture. Who's doing that for Black folks? In particular, who's doing that for Black folks in America? Who's doing that for us? Who's thinking strategically on a bigger level to say that, wow, a whole bunch of y'all just going to go out there and do whatever it is that you do? We have to be thinking more strategically in order for us to plan and grow, because we are at the bottom of the totem pole everywhere. We have no wealth. Matter of fact, we have this much wealth, but we're actually headed to completely no wealth. Right? So we're headed downwards into a downward trend of the wealth we already ain't got. So what that turns out to is wealth is not just about money, right? Now we're talking about resources and assets, right? So New Era King said, Prince Hall Freemasons to some extent for Black folks, but they're often ostracized. Well, so then that means if they're often ostracized, that means that they can't do the job they need to do, right? Like that means that they really, at the end of the day, they really truly can't facilitate what we need them to facilitate. And the way that the system is set up already is that white folks don't even know who's facilitating their shit. They don't even know, right? But we know that this is true because even if you go back throughout history and like recent history, right? Even if you watch the documentary 13, watch the documentary 13 and look how many presidents they show had an agenda and how those agendas played into each other, even when they don't know what happened. Let me say this multiple times. I'm not a Clinton fan. 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 So now the next thing that I'm going to say is I can appreciate Bill Clinton coming in and saying, I did not recognize how harmful the policies that I put in place with the 3 strikes law. I didn't recognize how harmful that was. Now, you could believe him or you ain't got to believe him. I really don't give a shit. I can appreciate him acknowledging that he said he didn't recognize how harmful those policies were. But Bill Clinton was the fucking nail on the coffin because this started way before that when they wanted to start with this whole law and order. It actually started way before that, right? So if you watch 13, they talk about the history of propaganda criminalizing Black folks. So we went from being on the plantation to being docile and we just like our watermelon and hey, massa, right? We went from that to as soon as the Civil War was over, we went to being savages on Birth of a Nation, right? We were savage and criminals and angry and you better watch out, white lady, like just instantly overnight like that, right? So they talk about the history there as to how we've been criminalized to the point where at the highest level, our legislators are figuring out how to put laws in place to keep us at the bottom. So we have to understand that we're not in those same positions. That's why I said everything in America is an agenda. That movie from way back that came out in the civil rights era was an agenda. That was an agenda. So everything in our country is an agenda. And we're the only ones out here thinking individually. Even us thinking individually is an agenda. So if you can remember, there have been times where we have organized and rallied and we've had movements. We all know this. The civil rights movement was just one, but even our ability to organize in different towns all around the country, right? We talk about Black Wall Street, but Black Wall Street was not the only one. There's all type of examples where we have organized and rallied and figured out how to come together collaboratively. Right. So it's now here's where again, there's an agenda. So all of a sudden they have this media campaign that comes out that starts talking about be an individual, be you, just be yourself. Don't follow the crowd. Right. That was an idea to start dispersing people from group think. They don't want people to think together. They don't want people to think together because there's power in collaboration. There's power there. So now even in the military, right? All of a sudden the military changed their slogan to Army of One. And then it was that idea, that slogan was used for people to be like, I could do this all by myself. I'm an Army of One. I don't need nobody's help. Then after they started assassinating our leaders and not even making it safe for you to become viewed as a leader in our community, they started pushing this message that you don't need a leader. You don't need a leader. You can do this by yourself. But they've already stated that the thing that scares them is a Black Messiah. Black unity and a Black Messiah. That's what scares white America. That's what scares those people at the top who are thinking strategically for how to keep power and resources within their control, right? So everything is an agenda. And if we're not going to start thinking strategically and we're not going to start thinking as a group and thinking for the betterment of the group, we're going to continue to be fucked. They got presidents and bankers, like the major world bankers and presidents are figuring out how to keep power and control inside of their hands. And we're sitting here thinking it's cool to not need help. I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of it. I literally, like, I just won this award. I had an opportunity to purchase a table. I didn't even want to reach out and ask my friends, would y'all mind supporting me and come and sit with me at this table to support me for this award that I won? I'm guilty of not asking for help and saying, I got it all by myself. I don't need help. So as I'm talking to you, I have to change my own way that I think, right? So this, it's we have to begin to think about what it is that we're doing or not doing and why we're always stuck in these same places, right? So it's this idea that we are thinking individually when we have to be able to think, um, when we have to be able to think together as a group. So we have to really remember that literally Black unity is feared. It has been labeled as one of the biggest threats to America is Black unity and a Black Messiah, because I still keep hearing the idea that we don't need a leader. And I'm not saying that we need like one leader, but even during the civil rights era, there was not one leader, but they all had the same objective. That was to get free. They might have gone about it different ways. They might be thinking about how, differently about how it needs to be done. But at the end of the day, during that era, during that period of time, we had Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the whole NOI does their thing, right? You had, Huey P. Newton, Fred Hampton, Assata Shakur, like there were leaders that were there, multiple leaders that were there with structure and organization and a respect for each other, even despite their disagreements. To a certain extent, there was still respect. So sometimes I think we look at problems like we have to shoot them with a straight shot, and we don't, and we won't. We're not just going to shoot a straight shot. Robert said Black unity is the Black Messiah. Now that's a good concept. I like that. I have never thought about Black unity being the Black Messiah. But I tell you what, both of them thoughts scare the fuck out of white people. They scare white people for real, right? So they start putting all type of plans into place in order to not give us back our resources. That's even our individual resources, like how we work, and that's the resources that they've stolen out of our motherland, right? So they do their damnedest. So let me keep going, y'all, because this really is about Becky and why she's bad for our bottom line. And I want us to understand why, not to say that I'm just like, fuck interracial dating, but as a whole, as a group, why we're headed in the wrong direction. All right. So I want to talk about the rise of interracial couples. So I talked about that. It went from like 85% of Black men marrying Black women, and now it's headed closer towards 70%. I believe it's somewhere around the 75% mark, right? So that's 10%, but in a very short amount of time. So we also have to understand that that dynamic is changing very rapidly, and that more and more Black men are starting to tip over and starting to look at and think about and date Becky. So that's something that, has just happened. So I'm going to take a quick moment because Mr. Dirt Diggler here said he just came in. He wouldn't know what we're talking about. We're talking about why Becky is bad for our bottom line. But I want to just take a moment to thank everybody who's in here. Thank you for joining me. Please hit subscribe. Make sure that you subscribe and share. I did come over from the Facebook platform, so I'm now coming over here live on YouTube. So I would love if you join me when I go live. So let me keep going. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about why is Becky bad for our bottom line. All right. So now let's talk about this. So I talked a little bit already about the propaganda situation, right? So now let's just remember that a lot of our media, almost all of our media actually, is controlled by the Jewish community. All right. So I didn't see enough people's videos get taken down when they start going in on the Jews. So I'm not about to go in on the Jews right now. I just want to make a note of the fact, because it's important for us to remember that our media is not controlled by us. All right. So our media is controlled by the Jews. So let's just start with that. So now what we're seeing on media is this mass media promotion for interracial couples. It is in print ads. It is in commercials. It is on all the sitcoms and all the shows. There's this mass production to push Black women towards white men, Black men and white women. And there's a few other different types of couples that's in there, but the predominant couple is Black and white. Black and white. That's what you'll notice, right? So I'm not going to say you won't see nothing else, but you're going to see that. And it's this whole whitewashing of things. So even when you see them put out like a whole line of people, it's like this whole beige line, right? And as a beige person, I recognize that shit. All right. I recognize that it is this whole idea of lightening up what everything looks like, not making it white, but making it light. And so we have to be able to start understanding that also colorism is an issue still in the Black community. Okay. I still get, look, I tell people, I just told y'all what I am. I am 1/4 Japanese. I am 3/4 Black. I profess to be Black. I'm treated like I'm Black. I've been Black my whole life. I grew up in Oakland, California. You can't get no Blacker than that unless you come from Detroit. But that's what it is, right? So I'm Black. But because of my features and because of my skin tone, you know what I'm saying? Like I get approached about, oh, baby, what you mix with and this and that, and you got the good hair and things like that. That narrative is fucking damaging, okay? My daughter does not have the same texture as my hair, and I have my daughter constantly saying, oh, I wish my hair was like yours. Where does she get that shit? I've never said that to her. I love all of who I am. I do not wish for myself to be any different because I'm going to be 35 tomorrow. Whoop, whoop, Pisces in the house. I'm about to be 35, and it's probably taken me 10 years of my adult life to really love the entirety of who I am, right? I should not be embarrassed about who I am or aspire to be different than who I am. But the same way that I love myself, I have to teach that same love to my daughter who has locks because her hair is a kinkier texture than mine. But what's happening in media is they're putting out this certain version of acceptability with Black folks. This is what made Wakanda such a big deal. This is what made Black Panther such a big deal, right? And so I'm not saying that we should, well, I have Disney stock, so please keep throwing your money at Disney. I'm good with that. But I'm not saying that we should have just been giving our money over to the white corporations, but I'm saying the messaging, for once, it felt like Hollywood got it right, right? For once. Now, we could tear that apart if you want to. I've seen people tear it apart, and I'm going to say, move on with that bullshit. There was beautiful Black women that were strong, that respected their men respected their women, all across that whole movie, right? So I thought, like, for once, to see that beauty in Blackness was a win for our representation and for our image. It wasn't a win for our pockets, but it was a win for our representation, and it was a win for the way that we felt about ourselves, and for our little Black girls to be able to see something that was beautiful in themselves, that was represented on the big screen, that usually doesn't, you know, get that or do that, right? So, so there's this media promotion that's happening, and some of that is making it seem like if you're missing out, like you're missing out if you don't have a white person in your life, right? And so if white is so good, then we must be bad. And I know you're probably thinking, well, that's a false argument, right? That's fallacious. Yes, it is. Who gives a fuck? Most of the media is fallacious. Most of our thought process is fallacious. We do not think through logically in most cases. And that's why I'm saying a lot of this pull for emotions, like the reason why media works is because it tugs on your emotions. So it's okay from a media perspective if it's promoting a false, a fallacy or a fallacious argument or a fallacious message, because it works. And they know it works, right? So there is this idea that if you're missing out on white, that you're missing out on something. There's this idea that if white is so great, then Black must not be great. So they're saying it without saying it, right? So yeah, they're whitewashing our features and beauty standards, absolutely, over and over and over again in everything that you see. Every little Black kid is a little light-skinned Black kid with curly hair. So then you recognize that that kid is this adorable little kid who is, you know, who is a product of an interracial or biracial situation, right? And I think we come in beauty in all shades. We know every phenotype comes back down to us, but that's not the messaging, right? Because all of us actually don't know that. Matter of fact, there's a lot of us. There are 44 million Black folks in America. I would guarantee you that not that 80, 99% of them don't know that all phenotypes come back and originate with Black people. They don't know that. So the messaging is still damaging, right? It's damaging to the psyche of Black women. As a single Black woman, it's damaging to my psyche. Like I can't even tell you how many men that I have not even like I don't be approaching men, right? But I can I've been approached by men who have told me they don't date Black women. I'd be like, Okay. And I'm not that I'm, over here boohoo crying about that shit because I have enough Black men that approach me, but it is the idea that it is damaging to the psyche of Black women, to Black girls, right? And then Black women are the primary care providers for our Black children. And again, that's not a hit out on our Black men because we already know the statistics show that our Black men are some of the most involved fathers when they are allowed to be. So I'm not making a hit. I'm not taking out no hits on I'm not taking out no hits on our Black men, right? But I'm saying that still most of the time the children reside inside of the home with the Black mother most often. And I know Black single fathers, right? So and big ups to single fathers, single mothers, but most Black children reside in the homes of their mothers. And so when you're damaging, when you continue to have messaging that's damaging to the psyche of Black women, then what does that translate into for the women who are caring for our children? So again, I said, everything in America is an agenda. Everything in America is an agenda. Nothing is by accident. Nothing is by chance. Everything is an agenda. So here's another thought, right? We think, and I'm guilty of thinking this way. This is my belief, right? We think that melanin takes over everything. Melanin just takes over everything, right? So every time we mix, every time we swirl, as some people like to call it, every time we swirl, our melanin is taking over that whiteness. But here's the thing. White people have actually used interracial relationships to attempt to whiten the race. So is that what could be happening with this agenda? Where we think we're getting ready to take over because we're killing out the white race, right? Our melanin is so much stronger. We're killing out the white race. Again, everything is with an agenda. So why would they be pushing this message for interracial relationships all of a sudden? Because I believe that they're beginning to attempt to whiten our race. They're attempting to whiten our race. Why would they want to whiten our race? Why would a white supremacist, and I don't even like using that word, so that's probably going to be the last time that you hear me say it. A friend of mine said we should not call them white supremacists because they're not supreme, but we can call them violent white racists. So that's typically what I call them, right? So why would a violent white racist want to mix in order to lighten in order to lighten the Black community, in order to lighten who we are? Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to do that? So let's talk about that. For starters, again, they've always been afraid of Black unity. And every time you invite Becky into the picture, you're creating some level of divide there. Can we agree on that? Can we agree on that? When we bring Becky into the picture, there's some degree, some level of divisiveness that just pops up, right? The second thing that they're doing is they're beginning to weaken us politically. So we have enough folks out here who talk about the fact that we should or we should not vote, right? And what I say is this: I believe that our voting power is weakened because we never leverage our voting power. So there's one aspect of that. But the other aspect is if voting didn't matter at all, then I think that they wouldn't give a shit if we voted. But they do care if we vote. That's why they have changed districts. So for Obama's entire presidency, the Republican Party has changed districts in order to make the Democratic Party null and void. I'm not Democratic or Republican. I have to state that because most of y'all don't know who I am yet, right? So I'm not Democratic or Republican. I don't believe in that bullshit. I'm not with either of those parties. But what I'm saying is that there, again, has been a strategy. So while for the whole 8 years that Obama was in power, you had the Republicans going in and they began to change district lines. That's why Hillary Clinton had 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, and Donald Trump still won, because the Republicans had an agenda, and their agenda was to change the lines in order to make our vote null and void, right? So it weakens us politically. We have no leverage. Should we decide to use our leverage, I would estimate that within maybe 4 or 5 more presidential cycles, the Black vote will be null and void. That's why you don't hear anybody going after the Native American vote. There are people who have no power. They have no power. Nobody gives a shit who they vote for. No one is after the Native American vote. But you still have people vying for Black votes because Black votes still matter if we concentrate them. If we concentrate them. The hard part is, how do we concentrate them? Well, how do you do that if you're married to fucking Becky or Brad? Shit. But if you're married to Becky, how do you, now you got different power struggles that are happening. Different priorities are taking place. Right? So it makes it divisive, right? It instills a situation where colorism becomes an issue. It weakens us politically. And then we have people who are beginning to not identify as Black. So what's going to happen is, even from a census level, we're going to be weakened in our power. So the things that we begin to fight for, to have a Black agenda, to get to do the things that we need, all of that is going to be weakened. So to me, and I did not make up this term, what I'm getting ready to use. I don't never try to take credit for something I didn't say. But as I was researching, like, what is actually happening with this dynamic of interracial relationships, there was somebody who said it's a Trojan horse. We think we're darkening the population. These motherfuckers is lightening the population on purpose. And there's precedent for doing this. They did this over in Argentina. So if you want to go and look at the situation over in Argentina, what you would find is that after they made slavery abolished, after they abolished slavery, they got their Black population down to about 3% in Argentina. And if you look at Argentina's, they are white-looking, they're white-looking people. Predominantly, there are predominantly white-looking people. They are whiter and lighter than they were, and they did that on purpose. They had a whole influx of white immigration that came into the country, right? So once again, I'm not for immigration. We not finna get into a whole conversation about no fucking border wall, but let's just be clear. The attack on immigration is not on European immigration coming into this country. The attack on immigration is brown immigration coming into this country, because they're working on lightening the population. So they don't care how many white immigrants come into the country. They don't want brown immigrants coming into the country, because they're shifting what the country looks like. So it's being lightened up. So where we think our melanin is taking over, once again, Black folks is being duped. These interracial relationships is not for the benefit of the Black community. They're for the benefit of the white community. Otherwise, none of these white folks will be letting their white daughters come over here and fuck your Black son. That wouldn't be happening. So this is an agenda, because everything in America is an agenda. So what if this is a Trojan horse, right? We really got to start thinking differently. So now, here's the kicker of all of this. Why is Becky bad for our bottom line? So first of all, a lot of people who get into these interracial relationships and have kids end up still getting separated, and the kids stay with the mom. Okay. So Becky and Jerome get together. They split up. Becky has the kids. Okay. That's statistics. Go and check it. Go fact check it. That's statistics. Becky still has the kids. So now Becky has these little Black kids. What conversation has popped up on a national stage for the first time in a long time? Pretty much since the first time ever that has really truly been on a national stage where you have presidents talking about it. What conversation is popping up? Who could tell me that? Bam, Dirt Diggler, reparations. Reparations is now a national conversation. Reparations is a national conversation. So now let's just follow this train. If you're going to start talking about reparations, do white folks want to give up reparations? Hell no. But what's going to happen is you're going to have enough white people who are going to have the conversation about reparations, because they now have Black kids who are descendants of American slaves, or American descendants of slaves, rather, ADOS. They're going to have Black ADOS kids. And Jerome is still being locked up, right? Tyrone, Jerome, all of us, all of our men are still being locked up. Becky is still winning custody. So what's getting ready to happen is we're going to have the conversation about reparations, right? Our men are still about to be in jail. Our mothers are still going to control the kids. So now when checks and resources start getting cut, it ain't gonna happen in this election cycle. I'm not even worried about this election cycle. I'm not worried about next election cycle. Give it a few more election cycles. Let that number drop from roughly the 75% that it is. Let that number keep dropping on down. Let it get closer to where half of Black men are dating white and marrying white women, having kids with white women. Let it get closer to where they have started to lighten up the population, where they're starting to kill the melanin, where they're creating divisiveness, where they have weakened our political base, where they have more and more people who are biracial, who are not identifying as being Black. Reparations is going to kick in, and half our reparations checks, half our reparations resources is going to quite literally cycle right back into the hands of white women. That's who's going to control your checks for your kids. That's who's going to control the checks. A good portion, not all of it, but a significant portion to make what we get not nearly as strong and help us build the way that we were going to build. So MMJ13 said Black women is always talking about Becky while wishing they could have Brad. I think Brad looks gross. Okay. I like all my Black men. I've never dated a white man ever. I only date Black. Okay. So I can't speak to everybody else, but the majority of the women who I know, not interested in Brad. That's the majority of the women that I know. They're not. And to the point of a lot of women who have ended up settling with white men. And I'm not about to be out here defending them because this conversation is not about them. But to the point of a lot of Black women who have eventually settled down with white men, a lot of them have dated either multiracial or have dated predominantly Black men. Like they don't have a long history of dating white men. I'll just throw that out there. But checks is finna get cut. Because that conversation is happening now. The reparations conversation for the first time in a long time, as it should, but as this movement comes around, like this movement to really address American descendants of slaves and have a conversation around what we are owed, as they have already been pushing out this agenda to make interracial relationships comfortable, to make them acceptable, to start making them feel like they're the norm. You got pictures where it's 7, 8, 9 Black men and all of them are with white women and they think that shit is just the coolest thing. They all got pictures. We all with Becky, right? And so what's happening is that money and those resources are going to head straight back in. And not even just those ones that will in the future, but even the resources and the things that we have going on right now end up being in the hands of white women. So now you have white women. We already know that they are the biggest users of the system, right? But now you have more white women who are headed into that system and at the expense of bashing our Black men. Oh, he left me with, I got our 2 or 3 kids. Now I got to go and get on food stamps. She was going to get on food stamps with her trailer trash kids too. But that's an opportunity to publicly bash our men as though they're absentee fathers. When again, statistics tell us, we already know, statistics tell us that our Black fathers are the most active fathers when they're able to be. But there's still a war on our Black men. There's still a war on our Black men. They're still being killed and murdered in the streets and they're still going to jail. So that hasn't stopped. So the acceptability of Becky dating our Black men hasn't stopped them or prevented them or saved them from jail and being killed. And anytime Becky calls rape, it's a done deal. So Becky is bad for our bottom line, y'all. Becky is bad for our bottom line. And we have to start thinking how to think together. How to think together. So Again, I just want to thank y'all for joining with me. I'm Jice Johnson. I haven't even said who I am in a while. I'm Jice Johnson. This is the Black Business Initiative. We are all about our mindset and our money and all things Black over here. So we're talking about money. We're talking about mindset. We're talking about how to build sustainable businesses. I hope that you subscribe. I would love to see you back. Again, I came over from the Facebook platform. So I've been going over live over there occasionally, and I'm coming over here to this YouTube platform. So I hope that you stick with me. I hope you hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you know when I'm coming on live. There's a lot of other things that I talk about, but just know I'm here talking about the mindset and the money and the mindset of the Black community. And that's what we're about. You can definitely find out more about the Black Business Initiative at bbiprofessional.com. You can also find out more about us if you want to get in more on our content level. Our content has a heavy focus on productivity, mindset, and business building. So we're out here building sustainable businesses that can help shore up our economic base. And so if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can go to Patreon at Grind with Jice. So I will drop those links in here. I love all the love. I'm gonna go back through and respond to some of the comments because I don't have any moderators. So I'm just out here talking, and I know there's a lot of comments that are going. So hopefully y'all are having a good conversation also in the chat. Unfortunately, I couldn't talk to y'all and go through the chat at the same time. But just know that I'm here, and this is what we're talking about. And so thank you for somebody who said that. Craven, thank you. Yes, I turned 35 tomorrow. So I'm very excited about that because, it's Pisces season, and I think Pisces women are the best women. But anyway, y'all, I'm getting ready to hop off. Again, I just appreciate you joining in. And like I said, I'm going to come back into the chat and just join in on any of the conversation in the chat because I know there's a lot that I missed. But I appreciate y'all for joining with me. And until next time, y'all, peace and prosperity.